Story 1. The town where everyone closes their curtains at sunset. I noticed the curtains on my very first night. I'd just moved into the town that morning, totally exhausted from the drive, and still half lost among unfamiliar streets. The place didn't seem strange at first. Small, quiet, and clean in a way that suggested routine rather than any real care. It had one grocery store, one gas station, and a diner with a flickering sign promising hot meals all day. But the menu looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. I rented a small house near the edge of town. It's white siding, a narrow porch, and a single maple tree in the yard that was already dropping leaves, even though it wasn't quite autumn yet. By the time I finally finished unpacking the last box, the sun was already sinking below the horizon. That's when I saw it. Every single house around me was doing the same thing. Curtains were being closed, blinds were being drawn, shutters were locked tight. All of them, at exactly the same time. At 6:47 p.m., the last sliver of sunlight dipped behind the tree line, and at 6:48, the entire town went silent. No cars on the road, no dogs barking, no distant TVs or laughter. It wasn't a gradual quiet like people settling in for the night. It was immediate, as if someone had just flipped a switch. I stood there in my living room, with boxes still stacked around me, listening to the complete absence of sound press in from all sides. That's when I noticed my neighbor across the street. He was standing on his porch, staring directly at my house. He was an older man, tall and thin, with a face that looked permanently strained. Like someone who'd spent their entire life bracing for bad news. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just raised his hand slowly and pointed right at my window. Then, he drew his finger across his throat. It wasn't aggressive. It was matter of fact. A warning, not a threat. He stepped back inside and closed his door. And without really knowing why, I closed my curtains. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled. The pipes ticked softly, and the refrigerator hummed its usual tune. But underneath all those normal sounds, there was something else. Low, deep sound, almost like breathing. It wasn't coming from inside the house. It was outside. Slow, deep, patient. I didn't look out the window. I don't know why. Maybe some deep instinct told me that once I did, I wouldn't be able to unsee whatever was out there in the dark. The next morning, the town was completely normal again. People were out walking their dogs. Cars passed by on the street. The diner buzzed with conversation. While I was at breakfast, I asked the waitress about the curtains. She stopped refilling my coffee mid-pour. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. "You knew?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. "Then you'll learn." "Learn what?" She set the coffee pot down carefully on the counter. "Close your curtains before sunset." "That's it?" Her lips tightened into a thin line. "That's enough." I tried to ignore it. Towns have quirks, right? Old habits, unspoken rules that probably make sense once you've lived there long enough. So that evening, I kept my curtains open on purpose. Just a crack. It's just enough to see the street outside. At 6:47 p.m., every single light in every house across the road turned on simultaneously. 6:48, the street lights did not. The darkness pooled unnaturally fast, swallowing the road, the yards, the sidewalks. And then something moved at the very edge of the light. It was tall, too tall. It stood in the middle of the street. I couldn't see its face. The darkness seemed to bend around it strangely, like it was absorbing the light, rather than just blocking it. It tilted its head, as if curious. Then it raised one long, thin arm and pointed directly at my house, directly at my window. I slammed the curtain shut so hard, the rod rattled in its brackets. The breathing outside grew louder. At 6:55 p.m., something brushed against the side of my house. At 6:56, the scratching began. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, just slow, deliberate lines being dragged across the siding, like it was testing, mapping the walls. At exactly 7 o'clock, it stopped. The silence that followed was so much worse than the noise. The next day, I went to the town hall. I told myself I was just curious, just trying to understand this place. The woman at the front desk listened politely as I explained what I'd seen and heard. She didn't look surprised at all. She simply handed me a thin folder. Inside were photographs, old black and white images of the town from decades ago. The same houses, the same streets. And in every single photo taken after sunset, the same tall shapes stood just beyond the edges of the frame. Watching, the town made an agreement, the woman said quietly. With what? I asked. With the ones that walk after dark? My mouth felt completely dry. What kind of agreement? She folded her hands on the desk. We give them silence, darkness, no eyes on them. And in return, they don't come inside. I witnessed it for myself a week later. A teenage boy was walking home late, headphones in, laughing into his phone. The sun was already gone. Across the street, I could see curtains trembling as people watched through tiny cracks. The boy stopped in the middle of the road, looking confused. He looked around, trying to figure out why it was so quiet. And then something behind him moved, very slowly. The next morning, there were no police cars, no missing posters. Just one less house with its lights on. They don't like being seen, my neighbor finally told me a few days later. We were standing on our porches in the bright afternoon sun. If you look at them, he continued, his voice low, they remember you. And if they remember you, they'd wait longer. I made a mistake, a small one. I left a tiny gap in my curtains, barely an inch. At 6:49 p.m., I felt it, pressure, the distinct sense of being watched. The breathing outside my window deepened. And then something pressed its face against the glass. I didn't see features, just the pure absence of a reflection. The next morning, scratches covered my window frame. But they were on the inside of the house. After that, they came earlier. By 6:30, then 6:20. The breathing started before the sun had even set. My neighbor stopped answering his door. One night I heard him screaming. The sound cut off abruptly. His house went dark forever. 3 nights ago I heard a knock, a real knock, on my front door. It was 6:15 p.m. A voice whispered through the wood. You see us? It said. You remember us. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely stand. We can make it easier, the voice continued. Join the town. And that's when I finally understood why no one ever leaves, why no one talks, why the town always has new houses available, but never seems to grow. They don't just close their curtains, they close their eyes. Forever. Tonight, the sun is setting. The breathing is already there, a low hum just outside my walls. My curtains are wide open. I'm writing this so someone knows. If you ever pass through a town where everyone closes their curtains at sunset, do the same, and don't you dare stay long enough to be remembered. Because once they learn your face, they never stop waiting. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to follow for more. Story 2. Every night at 3:17 a.m., someone knocks on my bedroom wall. Every night at 3:17 a.m., someone knocks on my bedroom wall. The first time it happened, I thought it was plumbing. That's what you tell yourself when something doesn't make sense, right? You look for the most boring, most logical explanation possible, because the alternative. Well, the alternative requires admitting that something is wrong in a way you can't fix. I had been asleep for maybe 4 hours when the sound woke me up. Just a single knock, soft but precise. And it was coming from the wall directly beside my bed. Not the window, not the door, the wall. I fumbled for my phone. The screen lit up my dark room, 3:17 a.m. I just lay there, completely still, listening. But nothing else followed. No scratching, no footsteps, no voices. Just silence pressing back in around me. Eventually, I managed to fall back asleep. My apartment wasn't new. The building had been standing since the late 1970s, or so the leasing office told me. Thin walls, old pipes, strange noises were just part of the package. People joke online about apartments being haunted, but most of the time it's just bad construction. So when it happened again the next night, same single knock, same wall, same time, I just rolled over and ignored it. That was my first mistake. By the third night, I was awake before it even happened. I didn't mean to be. I just couldn't sleep. There was this tension in the room I couldn't explain, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I just stared at my phone on the nightstand. The numbers glowed. 3:16 a.m. I held my own breath. And then, at exactly 3:17, knock. Knock. 2. This time, carefully spaced. Not random at all. Deliberate. I shot up in bed. The wall was just inches from my shoulder. Low, I whispered into the darkness. The knock did not return. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I examined the wall. In the daylight, it looked completely normal. No cracks, no marks, no hidden vents or pipes. It was a shared wall. The other side belonged to the neighboring apartment. I pulled up the floor plan online just to be sure, and according to it, my bedroom wall lined up perfectly with their bedroom wall. That should have made me feel better. Didn't. I finally met my neighbor later that afternoon in the hallway. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Quiet, polite, with a tired look in his eyes that went deeper than just a lack of sleep. "Hey," I said, gesturing awkwardly toward our shared wall. "This is going to sound weird, but do you ever hear knocking at night?" His smile froze on his face. "How long have you been here?" he asked, his voice low. "About a month," I told him. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "Then it's early for you." My stomach tightened. "Early for what?" He didn't answer. He just wished me a good day and quietly closed his door, leaving me alone in the silent hallway. That night, the knocking came early. 3:14 a.m., 3 distinct knocks, a short pause, then one more. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the sound might travel right through the wall. I pressed my ear against the cool drywall. For just a second, I thought I heard breathing, and then a faint knock from the other side. Answering, I started keeping a log, because once something becomes a pattern, you can't just ignore it anymore. It demands your attention. Night 1, 1 knock. Night 2, 1 knock. Night 3, 2 knocks. Night 4, 4 knocks. Night 5, 5 knocks. Always at 3:17. Always from the exact same spot on the wall, and always followed by a long listening silence. On the 6th night, I decided to record it. I propped my phone against a glass of water on the nightstand, making sure the microphone was facing the wall. I waited. At 3:17 a.m., the knocking came, just as I knew it would, clear as day. But when I listened back to the recording in the morning, my stomach just dropped. It wasn't just one sound. There were 2 distinct sets of knocks. One from my side of the wall, and one answering it. I had to talk to my neighbor again. I found him getting his mail, and I confronted him, showing him the recording on my phone. His face drained of all color. "Started responding to you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What is?" I asked, my own voice shaking a little. He hesitated, looking over his shoulder as if someone was listening. Then he leaned in and said, "The space between." I let out a nervous laugh. "That's not an answer. It's the only one we have," he said, and walked away. That night, sleep was impossible. I went digging online, deep into the city's old records, archived news articles, forgotten forums no one had posted on in years, and I found it. The building used to be something else, a long-term care facility, specifically a sleep research wing. They brought in patients with the most severe cases of insomnia, sleep paralysis, and night terrors. People whose minds simply refused to shut down. The wing was closed abruptly after an incident. The reports were vague. They always are. So on the 7th night, I did something stupid. I knocked back. I don't know why. Curiosity, defiance, maybe just sheer exhaustion. When the first knock came from the wall, I raised my hand and tapped back once. Immediately a knock answered. It's harder this time. Closer, then another, and another. Faster and faster, like it was getting excited. I pressed my forehead against the cold wall. "I know you're not my neighbor," I said softly. There was only silence. And then a sound like fingernails dragging gently across drywall from the other side. A whisper followed, so faint I almost missed it. "Still awake," it said. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The knocking just continued, even when I was wide awake. I started hallucinating during the day, shadows in the corner of my eye that lingered too long. Sounds that vanished the moment I turned toward them. My neighbor completely stopped leaving his apartment. When I knocked on his door, there was no answer at all. Then, on the 10th night, the knocking came from inside my room. Not the wall, the space behind the wall. Like something was pressing outward, testing its strength. The whisper returned, clearer this time. "Too much room now," it murmured. I had to know. I went to my neighbor's door and found it unlocked. I pushed it open. His apartment was empty, completely cleared out, except for the wall, our shared wall. It bulged slightly into his room as if something massive had pushed through from my side. The paint was covered in scratches, long, deep gouges. From the inside, and that's when I finally understood. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some monster. It was what happens when something listens for too long to people who never ever sleep. It learned our rhythms, our patterns, our curiosity, and now it knocks because it wants to be answered. Tonight is the 15th night. I haven't slept in days. The knocking hasn't stopped. Doesn't wait for 3:17 anymore. It knows I'm awake. The wall feels thinner now. I can feel a strange warmth radiating from the other side. I can hear breathing. It's just there, waiting. So if you ever hear someone knocking on your wall at night, don't answer. Don't listen. And for God's sake, don't stay awake long enough for it to learn your habits. Because once it starts knocking back, it doesn't stop until there's enough room for it to come all the way through. Story 3. Everyone in my neighborhood leaves their porch lights on all night. I learned why. The first thing I noticed when I moved in wasn't the cookie-cutter houses or the eerie, unsettling quiet. It was the porch lights. Every single house on the street had one, and every single one of them was blazing. I'm not talking about those warm, decorative lights or dim motion sensors. These were full-on, glaring porch lights casting harsh yellow pools onto the sidewalks and driveways. And it was 3 in the afternoon. I told myself it was probably temporary. Maybe a power outage earlier had reset everyone's timers. Maybe the neighborhood association had some bizarre rule about daytime visibility. But as I parked the moving truck and stepped out onto the curb, I felt a shiver of unease. Not a single light was flickering. They're all identical in brightness, intensity, and color, as if they were calibrated, a part of a system. By the time night fell, the street was brighter than most downtown parking lots. Porch lights, driveway lights, even backyard floodlights. There were no dark spaces, no shadows deep enough for anything to hide in. I stood in my new driveway around 9 p.m., just staring down the road. From one end to the other, the street glowed in a single, unbroken line of light. No gaps, no burned-out bulbs, no darkness at all. But for all its brightness, the street felt completely empty. No kids playing outside, no couples walking their dogs, not even a late-night jogger. There was just the light and the silence. My next-door neighbor introduced himself the following morning. His name was Thomas. A middle-aged, clean-cut guy, the kind of man who keeps his lawn trimmed with military precision. He shook my hand and offered a smile, but his eyes never stopped moving. They were constantly scanning the street, the houses, the empty spaces between the pools of light. "Nice place you've got," he said. "Thanks," I replied. "Hey, quick question. What's with all the porch lights?" His smile tightened, becoming a thin line. "You'll want to keep yours on," he said, his voice low. "That doesn't really answer my trust me," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't want to be the darkest house on the street." And with that, gave a curt nod, excused himself, and went back inside, leaving me standing alone in the blinding, silent afternoon. I didn't mean to break the rule. Honestly, I just forgot. After a long, exhausting day of unpacking boxes, I collapsed onto the couch and fell asleep with the TV still on. I woke up around midnight, needing to use the bathroom, and noticed the living room was much darker than it should have been. I'd forgotten to flip the porch light switch. I hesitated for a moment. Then I just shrugged. What was the big deal? I'd turn it on in the morning. That's when I noticed how quiet it had become. It wasn't the normal quiet of a neighborhood sleeping. This was a deliberate, heavy silence. I crept over to the front window and peeked through the blinds. My house stood out immediately. Every other porch glowed brightly, except mine. The darkness around my front door felt heavy, like it was pulling the light inward instead of letting it spill out from the neighboring yards. The longer I stared, the more convinced I became that the dark patch around my house wasn't just a shadow. It was a depth, something you could fall into. I heard it just after 12:30 a.m., a sound that didn't belong. Soft footsteps, not on the sidewalk, but in the grass. Slow, careful, moving from the edge of one pool of light to the next, always staying just outside the brightness. My heart started pounding against my ribs as the sound got closer to my house. Then it stopped, right at the edge of my driveway, exactly where the light from my neighbor's house ended and my darkness began. I leaned closer to the window, straining to see. And that's when I saw it. A shape standing in the dark. It was tall, too thin, and it was unnaturally still. The porch lights from the houses on either side of me illuminated its edges faintly, but something was terribly wrong. Didn't cast a shadow. Not behind it, not beneath it. The lights seemed to bend around it, as if the shape wasn't entirely solid, not entirely present in our world. I expected a knock on the door, a loud bang to send me running. What I heard instead was a soft tap on the porch railing, once, then again. Like someone was gently testing the wood, testing to see if the house was awake. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text message from an unknown number. Just 5 words. Turn the light on now. My fingers fumbled as I scrambled for the switch. I flipped it on. The darkness vanished instantly, swallowed by that familiar yellow glow. The shape was gone. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification. You've been added to the group chat Streetlights. Dozens of messages flooded the screen. Most were just timestamps and addresses, followed by short confirmations. Light restored. Status stable. Nitrogen monoxide breach. My address was the most recent entry. Thomas knocked on my door first thing the next morning. He looked tired. "You got lucky," he said quietly, his eyes already scanning the street behind me. "Lucky with what?" I asked, my voice still shaky. He glanced over his shoulder again before speaking. He didn't let it get close enough. "Let what get close?" I demanded. He let out a long, weary sigh. "We don't turn the lights on so we can see better." "Then why?" "They don't like the light," he said, his gaze finally meeting mine. "But they really, really hate being seen." He told me the history then. Decades ago, this land was just empty fields and woods. No roads, no houses. People started seeing things, shapes moving between the trees at night, always staying just outside the reach of their lantern light, always watching. When the neighborhood was built, the sightings stopped. At first, until one family let their porch light burn out. They thought it was nothing, Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. Just a bulb. By morning, the house was empty. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry. Just an entire family gone, and all the lights off. The next family to move in learned the lesson. The rest of the street followed suit. They moved through the darkness, Thomas explained, but they also moved through familiarity. What does that mean? I asked, a cold dread creeping up my spine. If a house stays dark long enough, he said, it becomes familiar to them. Safe, inviting. My stomach turned. And then he said, looking at my front door, they step inside. 2 weeks later, the power flickered. It was only for a second, but a second was all it took. Every single porch light on the street went out simultaneously. The darkness rushed in like a tidal wave. I heard movement immediately. From every direction, the sound of running, scraping, and something brushing hard against my front door. Just as suddenly, the light snapped back on. The street glowed again. The silence that followed felt disappointed. The next morning, the house at the far end of the street was dark. Permanently, its lights were shattered, the windows blackened from the inside. No one lived there anymore. No one talked about it. But now, every night, the porch lights on the houses nearest to that one seemed to burn just a little bit brighter than all the rest. I keep my porch light on, always. I've already replaced the bulb twice. I use high-wattage industrial-grade bulbs now. I don't ever let it flicker. Because sometimes, late at night, when the street is silent, I see movement just beyond the edge of the light. Waiting. Patient. Learning the shape of my house. Last night, I received another text from that same unknown number. It read, "They are staying closer now. Please check your bulb regularly." I stood at my window, staring out into the oppressive brightness. And for the first time, I noticed something else. The porch lights across the street weren't just lighting the road anymore. They were all pointing slightly outward, away from the houses, like warning beacons facing the endless dark. So if you ever move into a new neighborhood and notice that everyone leaves their porch lights on all night, don't ask questions. Don't try to save a few bucks on your electricity bill. Whatever you do, don't be the darkest house on the street, because the light isn't there to help you see what's out there. It's there to make sure they can't see you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Stay safe out there. Story 4. Every motel room I stay in has the same mirror. Last night, it spoke back. I spend a lot of time on the road. It's just part of the job. Contract work, short-term assignments, always in small towns that don't justify a long lease. Motels are easier, they're cheaper, anonymous. After a while you stop noticing the details. They all just blend together. The same thin blankets, the same buzzing fluorescent lights, the same smell of cleaner trying to mask something much older. That's probably why it took me so long to realize the mirrors were the same. Not just similar, identical. It really started about 3 years ago, though I didn't understand what I was seeing at the time. I was at a roadside motel in Arizona. One night, no sleep. I was staring into the bathroom mirror, and it just caught my attention because it felt wrong. It was oval-shaped with a slightly beveled edge and a thin crack running up from the bottom left corner that never quite reached the center. I remember touching it. The glass felt warmer than it should have. I told myself it was just leftover heat from the shower. A month later, I was in a motel in Nevada. A different chain, a different state, a different room number, but it was the same mirror. It's the same oval shape, the same beveled edge, the same crack, and the same unsettling warmth. I stared at my reflection, longer than was comfortable, trying to find some logical explanation that didn't make my chest tighten up. Mass production, I thought. Maybe it was just a standard supplier, a cheap design they reused everywhere. But something about that crack, it really bothered me. Cracks don't replicate themselves perfectly across thousands of units. That's when I started keeping track. I began taking photos. Not of the rooms, not of the buildings, just the mirrors. I get back to my room, pull up the photos from the last place, and compare them side by side. They lined up perfectly. Every flaw, every tiny scratch, every faint distortion that slightly stretched my face when I leaned in too close. I knew then, no two mass-produced objects age the same way, unless they aren't aging at all. The real turning point came in a town so small it barely existed on a map. One gas station, one diner, one motel. I checked in, got my key, and opened the door to my room. It didn't have a bathroom, just a sink and a mirror mounted on the wall opposite the bed. And it was the mirror. The same one, except this time, there was no crack. Instead, there was a smudge, a handprint. On the inside of the glass, my heart was pounding. I reached out and wiped the mirror's surface with my sleeve. The handprint on the inside vanished. And then I noticed my reflection didn't move right away. For half a second longer than it should have, it just stood there, staring back at me, while I had already lowered my hand. Then, it caught up. I laughed, but it was a nervous, shaky sound. People see things when they're tired. That's what I told myself. That night, I slept with the light on. After that, the dream started. I'd be standing in front of the mirror, watching myself sleep in the beds of motel rooms I didn't recognize. Different rooms, different wallpaper, but always the same mirror. And in every single dream, my reflection would turn away from my sleeping body and press its hands flat against the glass, as if it were pushing, testing the barrier. I tried to fight it. I started covering the mirror every night. Towels, shirts, bed sheets, whatever I could find, but it didn't matter. Every morning, I'd wake up and the covering would have slipped down on its own. It was always neat, always folded, as if someone had taken the care to put it away for me. I stopped trying after I found the towels stacked neatly on the sink one morning, bone dry. My next stop was in Oregon. The clerk, a woman in her 50s, looked at my ID and then back at me with a frown. "You've stayed here before," she said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "No, I don't think so. This is my first time in this part of the state." She hesitated, her eyes drifting past me down the hallway. "You checked out yesterday?" she said quietly. I laughed it off. "That's not possible. I was in California yesterday." Her gaze was unnerving. "Room 17, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I hadn't told her my room number. That night, curiosity got the better of me. The front desk was empty, so I slipped behind the counter and found the old guest log. I flipped through the pages. My name appeared dozens of times. Different dates, some from years ago. Different handwriting each time, but always the same signature. Every stay was for one night. Every stay was in room 17. and every single entry ended with a small check mark next to it written in red ink. The mirror finally spoke to me in Idaho. I was just standing at the sink brushing my teeth when my reflection smiled. I didn't. The smile was wide and wrong. Too much overlap, it said. Its mouth didn't move. The sound came from everywhere at once, a voice inside my head. "What?" I whispered, spitting out toothpaste. "You've been staying too long," it replied calmly. "You're noticing the pattern. That makes things difficult." It explained things to me slowly, patiently, like I was a child. It told me motels exist for transition. They're for people passing through, people between lives. But some don't move on, the reflection said, its image shimmering slightly. They get stuck. They leave pieces of themselves behind. The mirror pulsed with a faint light. Keep them. I backed away from the sink, my hand shaking. "You're not me," I said. My reflection tilted its head, a perfect mimicry of a gesture I often made. "Not yet," it said. Then it pressed its palm against the glass. At the exact same moment, I felt a cold pressure against my own palm, pushing from the inside. "You don't remember the first time, do you?" it continued. "The first motel, the first mirror. You were so tired," you agreed. My head pounded. Fragments of a memory started to surface. A night I couldn't remember, a room I couldn't place. A moment of exhaustion so deep, so absolute, that I would have agreed to anything for a moment of peace. Then the mirror showed me images, flickering scenes played out on its surface. People sitting on the edge of motel beds, staring blankly at walls. People standing in bathrooms that led nowhere. People trapped between rooms that reset every single morning. Reflections without bodies, bodies without reflections. "We need replacements," it said, its voice void of emotion. "Someone has to keep traveling. Someone has to keep the cycle going." My eyes darted to the bottom of the mirror. The crack was back, but it had shifted. It was closer to the center now, longer, growing. "You're waking up," the mirror said, a hint of annoyance in its tone. "You're remembering. That makes this harder." The final motel was different. There was no clerk at the desk, no cars in the parking lot, no sound but the wind. I walked to my room, the key already in my hand, though I don't remember getting it. I opened the door. The mirror was already uncovered. My reflection wasn't waiting for me in the glass. It was already out, standing behind me, perfectly solid, perfectly calm. "You can stop now," it said, and its voice was my own. "Or you can keep running." I don't know how long I've been driving since that night. Every motel looks familiar now. Every mirror feels warm to the touch. I avoid looking too closely, because sometimes my reflection still lags. Sometimes it smiles when I don't. If you're watching this and you're in a motel room, check the mirror. Look for a small crack in the bottom corner. And if your reflection moves on its own, don't stay the night. Don't even unpack, because once you check in too many times, you stop being the one who leaves. Thanks for watching. Follow 4 more stories from the road. Story 5. The radio in my car only works on roads that don't exist anymore. The radio came with the car. That was the only reason I didn't replace it immediately. The car itself was older than anything I'd driven before. A faded sedan with a cracked dashboard and upholstery that smelled faintly of dust and something metallic underneath. I bought it cheap from a man who didn't ask many questions and didn't offer many answers. He just handed me the keys and told me it ran well enough if I didn't push it. The radio was analog. No digital display, no presets. Just a smooth dial that slid across frequencies with a soft clicking sound. Most of the time it only picked up static, local AM talk, or the occasional country station that faded in and out depending on where I was driving. Until one night, somewhere between 2 towns that barely existed on the map, it landed on a station I'd never heard before. The signal came through clean and strong. No static, no fading, just a calm male voice, measured and steady. "You're running late tonight," it said. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I glanced at the radio, then at the empty road ahead of me. "I think you're on the wrong frequency," I muttered, more to myself than to anyone listening. The voice continued, unbothered. "Next turn, stay straight. Don't take the old exit." My stomach sank. There was an old exit coming up. A broken ramp that led off into darkness, marked by a half-fallen sign I couldn't read anymore. I drove past it without slowing. The radio hummed approvingly. I should have shut the radio off immediately. I think that's what a sensible person would have done. But something about the voice held my attention. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't excited. It sounded like someone giving directions they'd given many times before. "You're doing fine," it said. "Just keep your speed steady." "Who is this?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough that I thought the station had cut out. Then the voice replied, "Someone who knows this road better than you do. I had been driving for hours. The highway should have ended already. According to my phone, I should have passed at least 3 towns by now. But the GPS had lost signal long ago, stuck in a permanent state of recalculating. The road ahead looked the same mile after mile, same cracked asphalt, same faded lane markers, same dark tree line pressing in from both sides." The radio clicked softly as if adjusting itself. "Don't worry," the voice said. "It always feels longer the first time." Eventually, lights appeared in the distance. A town. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Streetlights flickered weakly as I drove closer. Buildings emerged from the darkness, shops, houses at gas station with a glowing sign that buzzed loudly. The radio crackled. "You don't need to stop here," the voice said. "I need gas," I replied. "You won't find what you're looking for," it said calmly. I pulled into the station anyway. The pumps worked. That was the first strange thing. The numbers rolled upward, even though no fuel seemed to flow. The tank gauge on my dashboard didn't move. I stepped toward the station building. There was no door. It was just a wide opening where one should have been. Inside, shelves stood half empty, stocked with faded products whose labels had peeled away long ago. A radio sat on the counter, identical to mine. It was tuned to the same station. The voice spoke again. "This place isn't for you," it said. The lights flickered. I backed away slowly and returned to my car. The town vanished behind me faster than it should have. The voice explained things gradually, not all at once. It told me the roads I was driving on weren't on maps anymore. Some had been rerouted, others abandoned. A few erased deliberately. "People forget places," the voice said. "But roads remember being used." I laughed weakly. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," it replied. "Oh. It just has to work." I wasn't alone on the road anymore. Headlights appeared behind me, far back at first, then slowly gaining. Cars with no identifying features, no visible drivers. They followed at a steady distance, never passing, never falling behind. The radio volume increased on its own. "Don't acknowledge them," the voice said. "What happens if I do?" "They might remember you," it replied. The voice wasn't live. I realized that when it began repeating phrases, certain warnings always came before certain turns. Certain reassurances always followed long stretches of road. "This is a recorded route," I said. "Yes," the voice agreed. "But I'm still listening." It happened near dawn. The sky lightened slightly, though the sun never fully rose. The radio crackled, and then I heard myself. My voice distorted but unmistakable. "You're running late tonight," it said. I slammed on the brakes. The cars behind me stopped in unison. The radio continued. "Next turn, stay straight. Don't take the old exit." My heart hammered. "That's not me," I whispered. The voice responded softly. "Not yet." I saw one of the other cars slow down, drift toward the shoulder. The radio hissed sharply. "No," the voice said. "Don't do that." The car stopped anyway. Its headlights went out. The darkness around it folded inward, swallowing it whole. The road smoothed itself as if nothing had ever been there. We passed through more towns, each one quieter than the last. Windows lit but empty. Stores open but unmanned. Radios playing the same station in every building. "You keep them running?" I asked. "They keep themselves," the voice replied. "We just give them somewhere to be." "Why me?" I asked later. "Why did the radio choose me?" "You drive a lot," the voice said. "You don't stay anywhere long. That's just my life." "Yes," it replied. "That's why you fit." "Fit what?" "The route." The rules came next. Never turn the radio off. Never drive faster than the broadcast suggests. Never stop where the road feels unfinished. And never, the voice added, let the silence last too long. What happens then? The road listens back. I saw the sign before the voice mentioned it. A green highway marker, rusted and bent. My last name printed clearly across it. My chest tightened. "That's not possible," I said. The radio hummed. You've been passing it for years, the voice replied. Just not like this. The station isn't a place, the voice explained. It's a role, like a job, like a responsibility. Images flickered through my mind. Drivers who never arrived. Voices that replaced older ones. Roads that needed guiding. You don't die here, the voice said. You continue. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cars behind me were gone. And there placed my car, following itself. Same dents, scratches. Same radio glow. Inside it, I saw myself driving, staring forward, listening. You can pull off, the voice said gently. End the broadcast. End the road. We'll find someone else. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The radio crackled. Silence pressed in at the edges. I turned the dial slightly. The voice stabilized, relieved. I don't know how long I've been on this road. The towns blur together. The exits pass by. Sometimes I hear new voices tuning in. Lost ones, tired ones. Ones who drive too far without stopping. I give them directions. Calmly, carefully. If your radio ever tells you it knows the road, listen. If it warns you about an exit, believe it. And if you find yourself driving through a town you Dante remembers seeing on a map-down T-stop, because some roads don't want to be forgotten, and once they start talking, they don't let go. If you've ever felt like you're on a road that doesn't end, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the forgotten places.